My name is Patrick, and I am here to present on the topic of building equitable classrooms using Equip to track student participation patterns with my mentor in the person of Dr. Alyson Lavinge. She is in the School of Teacher Education department. She's an instructional leadership professor, and I'm also doing, I'm currently pursuing PhD in curriculum and instruction with concentration in mathematics. I'm also a doctor, PDRF, which is Presidential Doctoral Research Fellow of Utah University as well. Next slide, please. So today in our session, there are 3 things that we are going to look at. One of them will look at research that has been done on student participation patterns in higher education classrooms. We'll also look at some of the steps in using Equip to track our classroom participation patterns. And then the last one that we'll look at also is to look at how to analyze Equip generated charts. That is to when you have used Equip after the charts that you have, we'll look at how you'll be able to analyze it to help you develop yourself professionally and also to help your students' participation in the classroom. Next slide, please. So we realize that student participation in the classroom is a key to the identity development, which is something very interesting because anytime students are given the opportunity to talk in the classroom, it builds their confidence. I mean, it helps them to know that what they are doing is right by teachers endorsing them, which is helping them develop their identity in the classroom, which is very essential to their success when it comes to teaching and learning, and also their success in the classroom. The other thing that we have also realized, which has been documented by a lot of scholars, is that the more students participate in classroom, the more they learn. That is something that is to say that anytime students are participating in the classroom, it helps you to analyze what they are saying, whether there are some misconceptions, whether there are preconceptions. Those are things that will help you to know, to be able to help this student overcome. And there are other times too that you realize that they have misinformation that you would want to help them, or get the correct information or correct them to be able to continue their studies to be successful. Next slide, please. Now, despite the fact that we have realized that student participation in the classroom is something that has to do with their success, there are still participations in the classroom is something that varies a lot. That is to say that opportunities that are given to students in the classrooms varies a lot. Therefore, there has been an inequities in the classroom when it comes to participation. And that has also been documented by some of the scholars in the field, which we have listed 2 of them that for your reference that you can go through. Next slide, please. Now, for this session, what are we looking at? The opportunity that is using this Equip tool is something that we all are looking at, that we want to build or bridge the gap between the student participation in the classroom, which will be the talk of the teacher, and then also that of the student, how they engage them in the classroom. So the first thing that we are looking at is also look at how instructors will better understand the gaps that we have already mentioned, and then also how instructors can adopt practices that drive equal or even equitable participation in the classroom. Next slide, please. So the overall big idea of this session is we are looking at how can AI and other automated tools help us address the problem of inequities in the classroom participation. And with this, the first thing that, or the tool that we are looking at, there are a lot of tools out there, but the one that we want to look at is the Equip tool. So for the purpose of this lesson, we are looking at how this Equip tool can help us engage students in the classroom to build an inclusive environment for students to thrive and then succeed in their learning. Next slide, please. So for that matter, I've talked about Equitable. What is it at all? So once I've spoken about Equitable, I realized that maybe some of you will be confused because we've not talked about it. So I just spoke about it. So now, this Equitable was developed by these two scholars in the field, Dr. Nyara, and then also we have Dr. Daniel. These are two people who developed this Equitable. One thing that is so fascinating about this Equitable is that it's a free app, an open source. It's something that you can customize to your satisfaction, what really the variables that you want to use this Equitable to track in your classroom. So there are a lot of variables or discourses that happens in the classroom. You can use this Equitable to customize it to the to find the variables or to find the variables that you want to deal with or look at in the classroom to help yourself or the student as well. So for that matter, this Equitable can also be used by instructors to code face-to-face and then virtual sessions in ways that automatically generate data so that instructors can see those who are participating in the classrooms as well. So that is something that is when you look at the beginning, I talked about how student engagement in the classroom can foster their success. So in this case, if you can use this Equitable to code face-to-face or virtual lessons to help you to reflect on what you have done in the classroom and how students are being engaged, those reflections will help you to either improve your lesson or try to change some of the things that you have not been doing right. Next lesson, please. Now, for that matter, maybe you would want to get started using this Equitable.
Thank you, Patrick. So as you watch the video, the first video about the introduction overview over Equip, what it will tell you is kind of what Patrick has already said a little bit about Equip being a tool that you can customize to look at classroom patterns. To get started, you first need to sign up. And once you have signed up, then you will actually have access to creating, customizing, observing, and analyzing your data. These 4 steps that you see here on this slide. As you get prepared, some things that you might want to think about first is what elements of participation are you interested in tracking? And you might not know, or you might know, but Equip will give you some predetermined codes that you can use that are pretty easy to use, like whether students are being called upon or calling out in the classroom. You might be interested in thinking about what student level variables you want to examine. As you do that, think about what variables you might already have access to or what you might feel comfortable asking students to share with you as a part of you studying this process. For example, Equip will automatically generate things like race for you as well as gender. But you might be interested in some other factors as well. For the purpose of the example I'll do today, I chose gender. So you might have some inclinations about there being some differences in participation rates that you're already concerned about in your class. And then you might want to think about what lessons might lend themselves best for observation and tracking participation. I'll tell you in advance that because Equip would require you to code a recorded classroom observation, if there's lots of overlapping chatter, it's very hard to figure out who's even participating and what they're saying, right? So in situations where you have more distinct discussions where there's turn taking are a little bit easier and more appropriate for using Equip. So you might want to think too, if your content dictates different types of participation patterns or talk patterns in classrooms, that might lend itself better or not to Equip. In terms of using an Equip, Patrick and I wanted to show you an example. So for the exercise for this presentation, I wanted to look at gender. I wanted to choose a relatively easy variable for me to code in this classroom, and I chose a couple of discourse variables. So I'll show that to you in a minute. I recorded 36 minutes from a longer class session of a doctoral course that I taught during the pandemic. So it was held via Zoom, which is usually pretty good for hearing and recording very well. And I had only 5 students in my class, which also makes this task particularly easy. So what I had for the actual coding exercise was a 36-minute recorded Zoom recording of video. So not just audio, but I had video for coding student participation as well. Once you have signed up for Equip and you have access to their web app, and you're ready to get started, the first step is going to be setting your demographic variables, or Dr. Shah and Reinholz call these social demographic markers. As you can see here, there's a couple of loaded defaults in here: race, gender. For my class, I wanted to look at gender because I know there's significant differences in gender participation as well, particularly in higher ed classrooms. Once you've chosen the variables that you're interested in for social demographic markers, you also want to choose what discourse dimensions you're interested in. So this is your how students participate, right? The latter was sort of who's participating, right? That tells you the who participates. This tells you how. So again, Equip will automatically load a number of variables in here, discourse dimensions like wait time, solicitation method, length of talk, as well as like how and why participation activities students engage in. So the types of talk that they contribute to the class. Once you've chosen your discourse dimensions and save those, then it's time to upload your student list, your student classroom. So because I was in Zoom, I didn't have a seating chart. I was able to add in individual student names and then would mark their gender if I had that information available. I use student pseudonyms for this exercise. They also have seating charts as well that you can utilize, and I do believe Equip has some feature where you can upload a student list of sorts. So those options are available. So imagining some of you might have hundreds of students, seems like a very daunting task. I had 5 to enter, so not as difficult, but they've thought about these differences in student class size. Okay, now you're ready to do the coding of your observation task. You want to name your observation. This will be important if you're going to do multiple ones as well. And you can add a short description as well, so you can remember what the class was about, the date, and if you want to give it any type of other naming. Whole class and small group might be useful if you want to look at differences in formats and participation rates. And then it's time to do the work. It's time to code. So I had recorded my 36-minute lesson, and then I went in and created all of these pieces, all right? The student list, the demographic variables, and the discourse variables. So as I re-listen to my 36-minute lesson, I listen for contributions that students are making. I can click on the student, and then I can click the method, the length of talk, and the student talk, and save that contribution. And what happens after doing that for 36 minutes, I have this contribution log of all the instances. They're not time-stamped, but all the instances of student participation in my class, who participated and what that looked like. That's exciting, but you're probably wondering, what else can Equip do for me? This is probably the most important part. Once you've done the contribution log and you click save, then Equip will auto-generate these charts for you that help you visualize the participation patterns in your classroom. Now, for me, you can see that I have blue is female and red is male here, and yellow non-binary students. So you can look at the differences in gender participation patterns in my classroom. As you can see, there's not huge differences. There's a couple differences in the what. But given the number of students I have in my classrooms, these might not be concerning differences. And then you can also look too at things like the length of talk as well, right? You can see here Male students in my classrooms have a significant amount of elaboration in their talk, and these are gendered patterns we would see in the literature as well. You can see some other contributions here in terms of gender patterns. You can also look at averages. You can look at other different types of output, and you can look across dates as well. What you have here, I find fascinating too, and you can imagine in a class of 100 students, this would look really interesting, is a heat map. So your hot students are the ones that are very, very red. It means that they're participating a lot. And your cooler students that are closer towards the blue end or the purple end have fewer opportunities to participate in your classrooms. And so it might help you identify quieter students, students that you don't hear from as much, and students who might be dominating a lot of classroom talk, and adjustments you might want to make based on that. You can also look across multiple observations and track changes over time. I think this is particularly key for those of you who are interested in documenting your improvements in instructional practice, especially improvements you want to make to these types of outcome or discourse, classroom discourse variables that you're interested in. So as you look at your charts and your output, there's some activities that you can do to think about it. I mentioned earlier, I don't have that on here, that the gender difference that did kind of come up for me, right? I was looking at all of these questions by gender, was seeing a significant length of talk for males in my classroom. So I might be asking questions like, how can I increase the length of contributions that females make in my classroom? Am I letting males in my classroom talk extensively, et cetera? Are students getting similar opportunities for holding that floor space of classroom discourse? I also saw some other general patterns aside from gendered patterns. I've noticed that students mostly make what contributions, and that students are primarily called upon, meaning that I'm dictating their talk opportunities, right? They talk because I pose a question. Which is also very standard in what we see in practices. So I might reflect on that and ask myself, well, what kinds of questions do I therefore pose in the lesson? Are they what, why, how questions? And do students ask questions of the instructor or others? Maybe I want students to initiate more of the conversation in the discourse in class. So some changes I might think about are what, why, and how questions can I implement next lesson? I didn't look at this. My guess is students make what contributions because I ask what types of questions. So I might be thinking about varying my types of questions I ask to foster different types of discourse. And I also might ask myself how I might empower students to pose questions to one another and to the instructor or the class, right? So returning back to some of the research that Patrick mentioned in the beginning of our presentation about how important student talk is, I might think about changing the power dynamics so that students are more empowered speakers in the classrooms rather than the sort of sage on the stage, the instructor kind of dictating that space, right? Finally, I noticed that Andrea was the quietest student in my heat map, right? And I might ask questions like, did I provide students similar opportunities to participate? Why? Why might Andrea be the quietest student in the heat map, right? I know that she actually arrived late to this class session, so I do know she had fewer opportunities to participate. But let's just imagine she was there for the full class, and I'm really concerned, and this is a pattern I see over time. I might wonder how I can invite Andrea in more to participate in the lesson, and maybe providing varied participation opportunities that are lower risk and increase student comfort might help bridge that opportunity gap that I'm seeing in terms of those classroom participation opportunities. So you can look at, you can look back at the social demographic variables you asked about, like gender, but then you can also see overall patterns and participation opportunities as well for just thinking about raising student talk participation overall, and then also looking at examining and addressing equity issues. So as we come to the end of our presentation today, just a couple of notes. About the use of Equip. As Patrick mentioned, it's customized, so you can create your own variables you're interested in looking at. The ease and the access, obviously, I can jump on right now, sign up and have access to it. It's user-friendly. And then I think the biggest benefit is once you finish coding, creating that contribution log, bing, those results tables become immediately available. So that is great for documenting your efforts and improvements and looking at issues of equity and participation. Some of the drawbacks, I would say, is some of the codes and demographic variables may be limited. Some of this might be due to what Equip can handle, but also maybe what you even have access to. The codes that are automatically available on Equip can be used with very little training, but some things that are a little more advanced might require some understanding and some training. You have to manually code it. So obviously this is difficult if you're thinking about a very large classroom with lots of talk. That becomes a huge challenge. And it's difficult to code and sometimes impossible to code small group chat, pair share. So you can imagine if you're teaching in a lecture hall of 40, 50, 60, 70 students and you say, okay, take 3 minutes, turn to your partner and talk. All that chit chatter that happens when the classroom becomes boisterous and loud just kind of gets eliminated from the coding because you can't hear who's speaking or what they're saying. You do know that students are talking, but unfortunately that gets a little bit lost in this type of coding opportunity. And there's no transcript that gets produced from the coding. So those are just some things to think about, drawbacks and potential benefits. If this is something that interests you, if you are interested in looking at automated tools to help you explore and address issues of equity in classroom participation, the Equip website's here, as well as the QR code to lead you to that website to get started. References are here for those references that we shared during our presentation today. And then, of course, if you have any questions, Patrick and I would be happy to talk with you more about this, to explore the use of it in your classrooms, maybe even in research, to think about building student participation rates and addressing issues of equity in student participation in your classroom. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing to connect with you on these topics. Thank you.